Good afternoon to you, or rather good morning to you. You think that the telecom debt woes as they stand are not a big risk to the banking system. To begin with, can you take us through why, what is the rationale behind this?
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. So we have said in our press release today that, the overall telecom exposure to the Indian banks is not large enough to pose a systemic threat. Given our bank analyst team thinks that the number is quite small, maybe around 1% of the total systemic bank loan exposure from the telecom companies. However, there could be some defaults from the smaller telcos, and some of the banks already have weak balance sheets. And, they could still require some capital injections from the government. But we don't think the sole problem is only telecom, which is only 1% of the systemic loan of the Indian banks.
So the telecom exposure is about 1%, right, of the Indian banks?
That's what our bank team
Okay.
thinks, yes.
If you could tell us, we know some of the weaker players. So that's GTL. Does Videocon still have any form of a telecom exposure? Reliance Communication, Aircel. If you could tell us the debt which is held by these weaker players, and if you could name the weaker players, in the telecom space, and what would be the exposure to the banking, the banking names, and the banks which are most vulnerable, according to your analyst?
So, we downgraded Reliance Communication to CCC last week, and as you know, that Arcom has a debt of about over $6 billion of debt, and that they are doing 2 transactions, but they are struggling to service some of their debt, and they are now in a standstill agreement with the banks for 7 months. Then you have Aircel, which again, I don't have the exact numbers, but they may have about $2 to $4 billion of debt on their balance sheet. Then the Tata Group, again, all these smaller telcos are struggling to generate sufficient cash flows to service their debt at their balance sheet. And Videocon is already undergoing some kind of a debt restructuring with their bankers. I can't specify the name of the banks here, but it's safe to assume that all the Indian PSU banks have exposure to these smaller Indian telcos.
Okay. So, right now we understand that GTL is an NPA for banks, right?
We don't rate GTL. We don't have a rating on GTL.
Okay.
Can't comment on that, yeah.
Okay. So the key reason is that the total exposure is not, so much to the entire Indian banking sector, just about 1.5%. And therefore, the weaker players, the exposure would be even less, and therefore, it does not pose a big risk to the PSU banks, right? To summarize it?
Yeah, I think if you summarize it, you have to look at, there is 2 groups of telcos here. One is the larger telcos, Bharti, Voda, Idea, which is going to combine together, Reliance, Jio. So these 3 telcos, obviously, we rate Bharti at BBB minus. Voda and Idea are going to be a stronger entity after the merger. So their bank loan exposure is, I think, it's all fine. They should be comfortable in servicing their debt. I think the problem lies at the smaller telcos, including Reliance Communication, Aircel, and then, Tata Group, you can assume that there could be some equity injection from the profitable Tata Group companies to the Tata Teleservices and other companies. And then I think Videocon is already undergoing debt restructuring. And then the smaller ones, including Telenor and, others, so they have sold their spectrum to the larger telcos like Bharti. So I think the problem really lies with 2 or 3 telcos, which, yes, they have a large exposure. But in terms of the overall loans of the Indian banks, it's about 1%. So it's not going to pose significant problems to the banks.
All right, Nitin, we leave it at that.